let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
We haven't
This
shipped
is
enough.
so
We
awesome.
are an open culture that believes
actually
in
a big
importance of
piece
What is that process that a developer, or let's say a
As the
developer
Kubernetes
should go through?
ecosystem really boomed,
Hello and welcome to this week's Ask an OpenShift Admin Office Hours live stream. I am Andrew Sullivan, joined by my co-host, Mr. Johnny Rickard. Happy Wednesday to you, sir.
Happy Wednesday to you, man. Happy to be here.
Yeah. You paused there for a second, and then I had to verify. Am I off mute? Because I was like busy fiddling with tabs and stuff during the intro video and all that other stuff. So you gave me a slight panic attack there.
This is my way of like waiting for you to finish before I start talking. Like it's like a physical thing where it's like I just have to stop because the energy's too high.
Well, so this week we are talking everything and anything VMware. So whatever VMware stuff you all are interested in, we have our esteemed guest, Mr. Dean Lewis, joining us. So hello, Dean, and welcome.
Hi, everyone. So thank you for inviting me back to come and speak again this year as well. It was a lot of fun last year, and there were so many questions from the community. And as I was saying before we got started, it's the one webinar that's really stood out to me over the last couple of years as well in terms of interaction from people. So thank you.
Yeah, we're glad to bring you back. And as always, VMware is it's an interesting topic, and it's a topic that a lot of people want to ask us questions about. I think it's no secret that VMware is the most popular deployment platform that we have. So it's natural and expected that lots of things, lots of questions, lots of all the stuff. So glad to have you back. And for our audience, for anybody who's watching, please don't hesitate to ask any questions that you have. We'll put those into chat on whatever platform you're watching us on, and we'll kind of queue those up and get to them. So don't hesitate to reach out. If you are not watching us live, we know that we get quite a few views after the stream has ended. You can still reach out to us. You can still connect with myself, Andrew Sullivan Andrew.Sullivan at redhat.com is probably the fastest way. But I do occasionally pay attention to social media and things like that. And of course, I think all three of us are on the Kubernetes Slack channel, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, if you go to kubernetes.slack.io.com, I don't remember. Johnny, you got a handy link for this, don't you?
Pasted it in already.
Yeah, there we go. So if you go on there, you can find all three of us, and happy to engage in conversations there. And I will, of course, toss Johnny under the bus as well. Johnny, JONNY at redhat.com. And we're happy to bring in Dean and help answer questions as well. But yeah. So yeah, good topic today. This is an exciting one. It's one I've always been passionate about. You all know, Johnny, like 10, 15 years ago, like I was a VMware admin. Like I very distinctly remember I was having this conversation with somebody like yesterday, Monday, of like, I remember my very first VMware deployment. It was ESX 3.0. It was on a AMD Opteron server, like back in 2007.
That is an old name.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was we got this random spare hardware. Let's see what all this noise about VMware is and all that. And one of my good friends and coworkers at the time, Glenn, Johnny, you probably remember Glenn. We silently virtualized a print server, didn't tell anybody, and then stole that hardware and added it into our virtual empire. And that's how it was.
I remember those days,
Nice.
like just virtualizing stuff and not telling people and seeing if they noticed.
Yeah.
Like, don't tell the application owner we virtualized their stuff.
Yeah.
I started my first IT job in 2008, and I moved to college in the UK. And they just implemented ESX 4.1, and they were the typical college with server rooms full of physical hardware, no virtualization whatsoever, and they went through a massive migration into virtualization. And they also decided to go really big with virtual desktop infrastructure too. So it was like I just got sheep dipped into this world of virtualization from nowhere, and it was just like mind blowing. It's like, this is amazing. And yeah, this has been my career ever since.
I have to ask Dean, because it's the first time I've heard that term, sheep dipped.
Yeah, so I don't know where it comes from in England, so to speak, but obviously it must come from the farming community of some reason, which basically just means you're taking like think of a sheep full of wool and you put it into like oil, it just comes out covered in it, and you're stuck. I think that's where the term comes from.
I love colloquialisms. I used to remember. I'm from the South here in the U.S. Right. I grew up in the mountains of North Carolina, so there's all kinds of Appalachianisms that have come through. And we used to have when I first joined Red Hat, we used to have a list of phrases my boss uses, because he has a lot of those Southernisms and other things like that are sometimes hilarious. But so thank you. Yeah, virtualization has been such a journey, right? When you think back and all of that, and where we started, where we are now, and everything that's going on in the world and the industries and all of that. So, all right, I'll quit dancing around, and I'm trying to see what's going on in chat here. It looked like there was something that popped in and then popped out. Johnny, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, we had an advertisement, so.
Oh, thank you. You're on top. On the ball, Johnny. On the ball.
That's right. I'm focused today.
So yeah, 4 rods to a hogshead. All right. So as always, we will start off our stream here and talk about some of our top of mind topics here at the start, as soon as I get rid of Johnny's name and email address up there. Although hopefully that means everybody will remember Johnny's email address and send him all the really hard questions. He loves the really hard questions.
I do, because I just forwarded them to Andrew. So yeah, no big deal.
So, we lost Dean. There we go.
Yeah, we had a slight needed to refresh the page there because there was an error message come up saying there's an error message on this page. Please reload.
Yeah, I've had that before. It's also midstream. I've gotten logged out. Like it pops up a thing saying you have been logged out, but the stream is still going, and I'm still able to do all kinds of things.
Do you ever sit there though nowadays when you see stuff like this happen? You think stuff like, "Oh, is this because one of the microservices stopped working, or is it because it's a monolithic application? It's just like a massive component of it's broke."
I just assume that everything is held together with spiderwebs, bubblegum, and dreams. So, I
Lots
at
of
that
dreams.
point, which one of those happened to have a weak spot that day? Those packets have to go across the pond. It's only a little bit of latency, Christian. Just a little bit of latency. That's all. Let's see. Top of mind, Johnny. You added a few things in here. Let's see. I will copy this first one here if you want to start talking about it.
Yeah. So in May, Red Hat is going to you need to update your proxy or your firewall to allow for cdn.quay.io and a couple other entries. And this is because registry.redhat.io is moving to it's going to be backed by Quay. So that way it's got the enterprise capabilities out of the box now. So that way it'll have like the the HA configuration and all the stuff that registry.redhat.io I guess doesn't have now. And so what'll happen is registry.redhat.io will redirect for a while, but it's better to just go ahead and get the host names updated in your proxies and firewalls, so that way you don't run into any issues down the road when they deprecate registry.redhat.io, if they deprecate it.
Yeah, I'm happy to see this. This is just consolidating and simplifying. So all of the container images will be coming off of quay.io, and presumably that still means that catalog.redhat.com will still work, though. Didn't see that one mentioned in there. There's registry.access and registry.redhat. So
yeah,
but the catalog here will continue to work. So I always go here and look for software, and then you can look for container. Nope, not containerized applications. So that one will certainly get you there. But there's also containerized or browse all. You're not going to give me what I want. If you go to software and then we go to container images, this is how you can kind of view the whole catalog of stuff.
Yep.
So anyways, yeah, that's a good one. Happy to see that one happening, because it'll definitely simplify things and keep it standardized. But yeah, definitely be aware of. I would imagine even if it redirects, you might still have to update your firewalls and stuff to allow all of those CDNs through, or all of those new domain names through.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, so just be on the lookout. It's going to happen.
Yeah. Let's see. The second one here, you also added this. This is from last week.
Yep. So you remember last week we were going through, are you production ready? And one of the questions that we got early on was, well, how do I know when my certificates are expiring? Like, is there a way for me to know this? And so we had some viewers from the not BU, I guess, but like the product management team that were watching, and they picked up on this question. And at the same time, a blog had been released that day, and so they sent us this blog, and so follow along, and you can get an idea of how you can use ACM to determine when your certificates are expiring in cluster, and do something about it before they actually expire and become a problem.
Yeah. Hey, PMs are part of the BU. It's okay. You can call it the BU.
I wasn't sure, so I was like, yeah,
So yeah, that's a good one. I like this. If you haven't experienced ACM before, I would definitely give it a look, give it a try. Among other things, it aggregates performance metrics and shows you different views on things, summarized views of things that are often very helpful. Plus, for anybody who's a Grafana fan, remember Grafana was removed from OpenShift 4.11. But it remains in ACM. So if you want to keep the familiar and happy Grafana interface for performance metrics, it's one way.
Yeah, the ACM Observatorium stuff is pretty awesome. I mean, it's awesome when it collects the multiple cluster metrics, or words.
Yeah. Let's see. So the next one is, I added this one. So if you have not been paying attention, or if you haven't looked at your cluster recently, updates from 4.11 to 4.12 are now in stable. So if I come over here to my OpenShift, yes, this is a 4.11 cluster. You can see I'm running OpenShift 4.11.30. And I'm going to turn off my name on that thing. I wish I could turn off the names on a per window basis, but so 4.11.30, if I come down here to administration and go to cluster settings. So first, you'll notice a couple of things. So one, I got this big yellow banner up here that says Kubernetes 1.25 and therefore OpenShift 4.12 removes several APIs which require admin consideration. So I'm currently in stable 4.11. If I select a version, you can see I've got a few other versions I can go to. Remember, I'm running 11.30, 4.11.30. So 33 appears to be the latest stable. And even if I turn on or try to turn on the supported but not recommended, so the conditional updates, it won't show me anything. If I switch to stable 4.12, I'm going to get effectively the same exact thing. So the reason for that is because this error, you actually have to do something. I think this might be a new, I don't know if it's new in 4.12, but I think it might be a new standard going forward. Or I wonder if it will be a new standard going forward, where you're supposed to read through all of this and then provide administrator acknowledgement, basically saying, yes, I acknowledge that APIs are changing and it could break some things, but please allow me to proceed. So we need to take this little snippet of command line here, and I'm going to use the terminal operator and wait for it to restart my thing. And then we will paste that in there. You can see all I'm doing is patching a config map called admin acks to add that I am acking this 4.11 to 4.12 API removal. So we'll hit enter there. It'll say that it has been patched, and we can minimize that. And it might take it a second or two to update here. I don't know how long it'll actually take to update and acknowledge or realize that that has changed. Hopefully it won't take too long. Come on. Anyways, after a few seconds, I'll let it sit and think to itself, think about what it's done while I ramble for a moment. So after that goes away, it'll open up the updates. So the first, or the stable channel, is available from 4.11 up to 4.12.9, I think. I had the tool open a moment ago. What happened to it? Update. Nope. Come on. There we go. My tabs keep reloading on me? Oh, I know what it is. So normally I keep stream open, like YouTube open in another tab. And I just realized that it keeps resetting those tabs because Chrome does the memory manager thing with it. So
Oh
it
yeah.
hibernates the tab. And then when I click over to it, it's like, however long ago it put it into the status. Anyways, I'm on the update path, if I could talk correctly. I'm going to select my channel as stable for 11. Current version is 4.11.30. I don't think you all can see those pop-up windows. And then you'll notice in this, I really wish it showed those pop-up windows. So what you'll notice in here is when I select, for example, 4.11.31, this is supported but may not be recommended. These are the conditional updates. If I select 4.12.0, no update path available, and that continues through 4.12.5. And then as of 4.12.6, you can update, but there are conditional, basically you have to accept a conditional. And then 4.12.9 is just a full, yep, you can update, you can see it's a direct update inside of there. So there's nothing that I really need to do except tell it to go. Hopefully this guy, there we go, has updated. So this is my, just to verify, this is my 4.11.30 cluster. I come down here to cluster settings. I can select my version, and 4.12.8 and 9 are both recommended. And then you can see supported but not recommended. So you can see if I select this one, so remember this is one of the supported but not recommended, it gives this warning about, hey, something might be causing an issue, right? Or you might be affected by this leaked machine config blocks. And it takes you directly to the issues.redhat.com, basically allowing you to decide whether or not this is something that is impactful or important to you. But if I just select, let's untick this and select 4.12.9, it just says, okay, I'm happy to go. So yeah, this one took a little bit longer than normal. Normally we say 45 to 60 days after a release is when updates in stable will be unblocked between the minor versions. I think it was released January 17th. So February, March. Yeah. So this was more like, 75 days, something like that?
75, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's here finally. Yay. Coincidentally, my follow-on news to that is so we have scheduled the what's next, or excuse me, the what's new in OpenShift 4.13 presentation or live stream. So that will be happening April 26th at 11 a.m. Eastern. So if you're looking at your calendar, April 26th is a Wednesday. It is 3 weeks from today, which means that Johnny and I will not be streaming that day. But one or both of us, so I'll definitely be here. I don't know if Johnny will be, but I'll be here. I'll be on the chat. I'll be answering questions. If anybody has any questions for the PMs, I'm happy to shuttle those over. But yeah, looking forward to the what's next in 4.13. There's a ton of really cool stuff that's happening inside of there. Not the least of which is we are rebasing to RHEL 9.2, so that should be interesting.
It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I'm curious to see like what in theory it's not a quote unquote big deal, right? From CoreOS's perspective, it's just an RPM OS tree update, right? There's no significant change there, except that there is a significant change. So anyways, be prepared. Note that this is not an EUS release. 4.13 is not an EUS release. So I would strongly suggest if you think RHEL 9 is going to affect your applications, start testing when 4.13 comes out. So that way when 4.14, which will be an EUS release, comes out, you can at least be ahead on the RHEL 9 impact. Oh, that's another thing to note. So if I change my channel here to EUS updates are also available. So you can do EUS updates from 4.10 to 4.12 using that process for the accelerated updates. Did I miss anything in chat, Johnny?
Nope. So our Hope 9 said that he noticed that the 11 and 12 path got pushed yesterday, and then then just made a comment about 4.12 looks very nice with the banners and stuff like that.
Yeah, the update banner. I made the mistake, so I deployed a new cluster this morning over here. This is wow, what is going on with this cluster? it's like not even populating anything. This cluster fall over. Like no cluster ID, no version. This cluster must have died.
Yeah. No.
Well, I'm glad I have a backup one. But anyways, yeah, with the new version, it pops up a banner when you go to start updating. So let's go back to stable 4.12, and I want to go 4.12.9. And when I click update there, I don't remember if it does it with 4.11, but definitely in 4.12, when you go in between Z streams, it pops up a banner across the top that says you're up. This cluster is currently updating.
I can show you mine. I have one right now if you want to see it.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to happen on 4.11, but I think it's a yellow or orange banner. Yeah, it's up to you if you want to share.
Yeah,
Yellow,
let me show
okay.
it real quick. Let's see.
This cluster should not be updated. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Pretty yellow banner.
Yep.
That everybody can see.
Maybe
right,
that's orange. I don't know.
It looked yellow
blue.
to me. Do we have anything else? Storage, something storage related here?
CSI
yeah, it's just
migration.
a blog.
I haven't looked at this blog.
Yeah, it was just a quick blog on somebody wrote a blog about storage, being complex in Kubernetes, and oh yeah, good point, Dean. Well, yeah, so this is just a blog about like the different types of storage that are within Kubernetes and kind of like the way that Kubernetes is going with how they're managing storage at the end, or that's the end game, I guess. And so just if you're curious about how things are moving and like why they're moving, like this is a pretty decent 3 or 4 minute read on just getting the rundown of CS or Kubernetes storage. And then Dean, you made a good point. You want to bring that up?
Yeah, sorry. So I know Andrew talked about it before we got started live about he was going to mention the CSI migration going live in 4.13, I think.
Yeah, for vSphere. Yeah, it's already started with some. So I'll pause for a moment just to mention I know Mr. Cade, so happy to see him posting up here.
Yeah, me too. I've been doing some community work with him called 90 Days of DevOps on GitHub. So
yeah, I saw your post on Reddit. So, but yeah, he's been out in the community and very public and doing all this other stuff for a number of years now. So good for him. Yeah, and he's still at Veeam, I see. So, so CSI migration. So way back in OpenShift 4.9, we released the Red Hat VMware CSI driver as generally available, which is basically a downstream of the VMware CSI driver. And over the last few versions, we've gone through and been making various changes. So if we go to the docs here, to add functionality, put in requirements, so that way, basically, when it comes time, everything will be there so that you can take advantage of the CSI driver and its capabilities. So, for example, I'm looking at 4.12 docs right now. And if I scroll down here to vSphere and installing a cluster on vSphere, as you read through this, down here, you can see that as of 4.12, 7.0 update 2 or later is required, along with hardware version 15 or later. But if we jump back to like 10, and we look down here, OpenShift 4.10, you can see it's 6.5 or later and 13 or later, unless you were using the CSI driver, and then you needed 6.7 U3 or later and hardware version 13 or later. And now, and Dean, please correct me if I'm wrong, the 7.0 update 2 is for the CSI migration piece.
Yes.
So that effectively in the future, and by the future, I mean, I think 4.13, CSI, we will be automatically migrating any remaining in-tree provisioned volumes to CSI volumes. It should be a non-disruptive thing. I know they've been testing it for a while. I know, and not just Red Hat has been testing it. It's been a part of VMware CSI driver for quite a while now.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I'm here today. So this is obviously some of the co-engineering that's gone on in the background between VMware and Red Hat as well. So it's really cool that Red Hat have adopted the upstream vSphere CSI driver that we created, and actually brought that into the Red Hat OpenShift API installation. So it's part of the cluster operator out of the box straight away as soon as it realizes you're on vSphere. That's amazing. And actually, it's also part of the assisted installer now as well, because I was playing about that the other day. So you can click a box on assisted install to say it's going to be deployed to a virtualization platform. And then once your cluster comes online, if you go onto the home screen of your console, you've got a little box there that you can input your vSphere credentials for, and then it configures the CSI driver for you as well. That's really cool. And as you mentioned, if you're going through a cluster upgrade, it's going to remove that in-tree storage driver. So that was part of the Kubernetes code itself. And it's going to migrate everything across into the CSI, which is obviously the new interface for doing storage going forward inside Kubernetes. That should be quite seamless for everyone. If anyone's got any questions or queries about that before they upgrade the Red Hat instance, obviously get in touch with your Red Hat account team and your technical team from Red Hat as well, or open a support ticket behind that. But there's been a lot of test and validation and co-engineering going on behind the scenes between both companies to make that possible.
Yeah. And you can see on this page, it's vSphere is not the only platform that is doing the CSI migration. There's others as well. Dean, as far as I know, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong, there's no disruption to the pod or to the PVC.
No, there shouldn't be.
Yeah. So, whenever the storage operator gets updated during your cluster upgrade process, it'll manage that migration stuff, but it should be a non-disruptive operation for the pods. They don't, as far as I know, they don't need to restart.
Yeah. So obviously, the only thing that I can mention here around this as well is, of course, OpenShift is a platform sat on top of a virtualization platform. So before you do these upgrades, well, make sure your underlying virtualization platform is healthy, and make sure your storage platform is healthy as well, because again, you're exposing the vSphere storage into your Kubernetes environment here. So I know one of the queries that came up a while ago when we were testing this was we were seeing an error during the CSI migration. And this was when it was running on top of vSAN, and then the answer actually was rooted in, hey, there's actually an error in the vSAN health checks that needs to be resolved first. This is why you're now seeing this error manifest inside the CSI migration, because the underlying platform isn't healthy. So you know, and it was like, oh, okay, we're going to document that, and now we know it happens because this is the type of testing we go through. Is we break stuff and then try and migrate and so forth. But again, it comes down to typical prior planning leads to that success.
Yeah. So here's an interesting thought exercise for you. We all have flown quite a bit in our lives, right? So you know that airplanes have like a threshold of the number of things that are allowed to be broken or non-functional before the airplane is no longer allowed to fly, right? And you don't ever look into that or ask, because it's terrifying what all can be broken and how much of it can be broken. I wonder if our IT infrastructure is the same. Like,
so I remember
always something broken.
I remember, as a side note, like reading confessions of like an aircraft carrier repair company, and one of them was the pilot stated that on this particular aircraft that the auto landing software wasn't working correctly, and the response back from the engineer was, this aircraft doesn't have any auto landing software.
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, back to basics. Whatever type of migration you're doing, with your migrating your virtual machines, your containers, that you always want to make sure the underlying platform is as healthy as it can be. If you are unsure, you pay for support contracts, so use them. Get in touch. Ask that query up front. Nobody wants you to be calling either company with a major critical down incident because you weren't sure and you decided to press upgrade or migrate anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah, I keep thinking back to conversations I've had with our Splat folks. Dean, you talk with Joe and Rickard regularly around things like, live migration, vMotion, and make sure that you have followed VMware's own best practices for vMotion, because otherwise, yeah, you can, I'll call it the blip is longer than expected, which can affect things like etcd and all that other stuff. And so it's funny how often they'll repeat this mantra when people ask internally of, well, did you follow VMware's best practices? Like, have you validated that the cluster is healthy, that the network isn't starved for resources, like all this other stuff?
Yeah, it's Oh, sorry, John.
Go ahead. No, please.
I was going to say, so it was a while ago, actually, Andrew, we were chatting over Slack about, it was a joint customer where they were seeing some interesting storage behavior, and it actually was rooted in high storage latency from the underlying array that was connected into the vSphere host. Then the OpenShift platform was on top of it, and OpenShift saying, hey, create me some storage, and vSphere's going, hey, storage array, create me some storage, and the storage array just wasn't returning anything in time. And and it's obviously there's quite a chain there to go through from a troubleshooting process. But again, that I know we were chatting over Slack because it ended up becoming a joint effort to help troubleshoot this with the customer as well.
Yep.
Maybe that's a good place to start, because that always comes up. Who supports what? Between VMware and Red Hat. The answer obviously is it depends, just to make it really easy when it's technology. But obviously, if you've seen it manifest in the Red Hat side of things, get in touch with Red Hat straight away. If you've seen it manifest in the VMware platform first, take it with VMware. If you realize it's affecting one or the other platforms, open up 2 support tickets, one with each vendor, and tell each vendor that those tickets are open, and provide each other the request numbers for that as well. And if needed, we can escalate and we can work together and get on a joint call with you as a customer and have both teams on that same call as well, because we are both interested in the same thing, which is the same outcome, which is fixing your problem. Red Hat is Red Hat Linux, Red Hat OpenShift, fully supported, running on vSphere. We've worked for many years validating solutions. So one of the things that I had to share today was we recently have updated our VMware Cloud Foundation platform to 4.5. We've also released a white paper for that about running OpenShift on top of it, and all of the validation installation steps we went through with that. And that was co-wrote with Red Hat as well. These last couple of weeks, I've been validating the Oracle Cloud VMware solution, which is a managed VMware solution provided by Oracle Cloud, and running OpenShift on top of that. So we'll have some documentation out about that in the future. Red Hat today and VMware, you can go off and install and run that yourselves. But customers have been coming directly to both of us and asking, saying, hey, actually, we'd like to see some official documentation on this as well. And we've been obviously going ahead with that and getting that under wraps as well. I'll get that link for the white paper I just mentioned into the chat as well in a second.
Yeah, I see, and we'll answer questions here in just a moment. But I see Steve asking about OpenShift versus Tanzu and all of that. I acknowledge, I realize that in some ways, in very direct ways, Red Hat and VMware compete with each other. But I will say unequivocally, and in every single instance, when it comes to OpenShift on VMware, RHEL on VMware, like all of those things, like everybody is nothing but customer focused. Like, there has never been any, oh, well, if only the customer was doing this type of stuff. Like, no, it has always been very friendly and very customer focused in that respect. And I know, Dean, you have conversations probably with more engineers than I do at this point. Remember, I got manager in my title now, so.
You're not allowed on those calls anymore.
Yeah. So, I get further and further away from the keyboard and spend more and more time doing exactly this, right? Running my mouth and having meetings. But no, it's always interesting to see just how, yes, there are competing aspects, but really what everyone cares about is making our customers successful.
Yeah, and I spend probably a couple of customer calls per month speaking to VMware customers who are running Red Hat OpenShift and chatting to them about how to do storage, networking, monitoring, best practices, issues that they've had, or just talking about the story of, hey, Dean, we're going to run OpenShift on top of this. How do VMware and Red Hat support this together? The OpenShift compares to Tanzu type thing. There's obviously, again, a lot of choice in the market from that point of view. From VMware's point of view, we provide you the best platform to run your Kubernetes experience on as far as we're concerned, which is the virtualization layer. We, of course, do have some components which we can say are competitive with Red Hat as well. Let's make no bones about it. But we're here to help support a customer with whatever choice they make in terms of product that they want to use. And then again, we've got other products that layer on top of the Kubernetes experience as well that also work with Red Hat OpenShift as well from an operational point of view and a developer experience point of view as well, the same way that you could choose another third party for that experience.
Yep. Yeah, I tend to stay out of competitive conversations because
Yeah.
I have other things to focus my energy on. But like you just said, and I it may not have been it may not have been obvious there, but many of the components of Tanzu outside of like the Tanzu Kubernetes itself, they work with OpenShift too. So
Yeah,
like Tanzu Observability, Tanzu Mission Control,
yeah,
Tanzu
very
Application
much.
Platform. I think
Yep,
that's
so the
TAP. Yeah.
application platform. Yeah, so I worked with the team on the back end to validate all of that, and we've also got Tanzu Service Mesh as well. Again, I worked with some of the engineering teams on validating all that, testing it, and so forth as well. I noticed one of the questions, just because the questions start to come in now. So someone, Babuni, has installed OpenShift 4.12 on VMware, but the default storage volume snapshot is not working and showing an error. So the CSI driver up front installs the CSI driver components. There is some additional installation manifest that you need to run to get the snapshot component working as well. So if you just head over to the VMware documentation for the vSphere storage CNS, that will give you the instructions of what you need to install there, so that snapshot component works. If you've already done that and it's not working, a little bit hard to dissect without more logs. But I check things that are obvious, like creating storage volumes. So creating a PV does actually work up front as well. It's still working to make sure your credentials are correct. And also, if you look at the CSI controller manager as part of the vSphere CSI and look into the logs in there, you've got a couple of containers in there, and each container holds a different management component for creating snapshots, resizing, provisioning, and deprovisioning as well. So look through those logs as well if you want to start deep diving into that.
Yeah, usually my first question is permissions when it comes to something like that. In theory, the storage operator, the OpenShift storage operator, should deploy things like the volume snapshot class and all of that for you automatically. But yeah, to Dean's point, check the logs, especially for the CSI operator and the CSI driver. It should tell you if it's encountering any issues. You can also look at the vCenter logs. Sometimes you'll see errors that pop up there because remember, it's just talking to the vCenter API. So if it tries to create a new disk and it fails, that'll pop up as an error in vCenter as well, if you have access to vCenter. Oh, and the other thing I would ask, particularly, you said the default storage class. So I would think that that should be fine, but the vSphere problem detector can also help. So check the logs for the vSphere problem detector in OpenShift. It'll tell you if things like credentials are wrong or various other issues that are happening inside of there. But if you happen to change, like after deployment, you change maybe the data store that it's using or something like that, again, check that those permissions. Let's see.
Yeah, so I'll give Jonathan the link to post for the vSphere problem detector, which is a great catch. That's a really great thing as an operator to have, like being as a Kubernetes operator. It's really quick and easy to install it, really quick and easy to run. It saves you a load of troubleshooting time as well. I really like that experience, and it runs automatically in the background every couple of hours for you. So again, it's not just a one-off thing; it will keep looking into that for you as well.
Let's see, when using storage vMotion can cause issues and is not supported. Correct.
Yeah. Yeah, correct. So, and this is it's not just a Red Hat thing. The issue here is, again, we're running a platform on top of a platform essentially. So inside of that top level platform, which is OpenShift, we've then got software in there which communicates with the underlying platform. We're connecting volumes ad hoc to those nodes as and when they're needed. If that pod gets rescheduled to a new node, that volume has to be moved to a new node as well. When we migrate using storage vMotion, we lose that ability to understand what was mapped where, when, and how. And if something happens at the pod level during that migration as well, you could end up with more problems. So the way to synchronize that is it has not been passed through to be governed inside CSI. Now, what I can tell you in the background is we are actually working inside of VMware today in the team that creates the CSI driver to address that challenge today. So I think if you go to our GitHub pages, so you're going to be looking for the upstream edition of the vSphere CSI, you will find a page on there, and there is a way to contact the VMware team to ask to look at the beta code that's available for that. And I know that in the background, Red Hat are also looking to evaluate that code and helping us with that code as well when it comes to OpenShift. I don't have timeframes today on when that's going to be made available and when that will be supported in the future. Again, if you're a Red Hat customer, a VMware customer, provide those needs, those timeframes. You've got migration plans in place. Let us know about that, and we can pass that to the team as well. But for any of you that are just interested in where we're up to with that, it's currently being actively worked on. We just don't have timeframes of when that's going to be ready and out there in the hands of everyone so far.
Yeah, and Dean, I don't know how common knowledge it is, but when you create a PV, so PVC, when you request a PVC on the VMware side in the Datastore, is just a VMDK.
Yes.
So I think it's important to point out that that's why storage vMotion isn't supported, because it's a VMDK, and if it's mounted to a pod, then what the VMware driver does in the background is it connects that VMDK to the VM.
Yes.
And by default, storage vMotion takes all of the attached disks with it.
Yep.
Which is where it introduces that breakage in there.
Yeah, so we're essentially going to, like I say, there needs to be a little bit of smarter information in that CSI driver, how it manages that, and also there needs to be some signals back and forth, say, hey, we're going to do storage migrate vMotion, we're going to migrate this data between data stores, and how do you handle that? And again, as you mentioned, Andrew, when you do things like vMotion, storage vMotion, there's a stun time to do that as well. So it will affect your application that's running inside of that pod. So as I say, the team are working on that. It is on their roadmap. It's currently being tested by Red Hat in the background as well, and they're providing their feedback on it. If you want to play around with the upstream vSphere CSI driver from our GitHub pages and get access, you can contact the VMware team through those GitHub pages to do that. And hopefully, sometime this year we'll get that code out there. But we're only going to do it when it's ready, when it's tested, when we validate it with the likes of Red Hat as well.
Yep. Yeah, I will offer so two options that one will definitely work, the other one should work. So if you need to move your node, your OpenShift node, to a different data store for whatever reason, one thing, if it's a manually provisioned node, so not using a machine set, turn it off, right? So, and do a cold storage migrations. So it's not a vMotion, it's just a storage migration. So that way all of those disks are disconnected and all of that other stuff. Just make sure that whatever node it's going to, so if you're changing DRS clusters or something like that, make sure that whatever data store the PVCs are contained in is still accessible to that OpenShift node. The other option, if you're using machine sets, so kind of by default with an IPI deployment, is to add a new machine set in the new data store and scale up in the new data store and scale down in the original data store.
Yeah, and I actually think that's quite an elegant solution, to be fair, rather than this ad hoc right-click virtual machine and migrate and so forth. Because the other bit as well is, all of your scheduling control of your applications is done inside the Kubernetes layer because it's pods and containers. So why not let that do the best job it can of scheduling and migrating all that bit for you, and the infrastructure bit becomes composable, which is, do you really care about moving that virtual machine? Or if you build a new virtual machine and kill the other one, do you not really care? That whole pets and cattle type conversation that we had about virtual machines probably 5 years ago. So yeah, and there's a question as well from, and I apologize if I'm going to say this name wrong, Mladen. Can we migrate with some magic data from a thin storage class PV to the thin CSI class PV? Because we use the thin class and plan to switch to the thin CSI. So what's actually going to happen is the volume itself stays in place. It's the driver that's being used for removing that in tree when we do the CSI migration. So the volume will not change. So typically we don't hear about thin to thin migration in that sense, where the data is already thin. We use the thick to thin, which is where you would need to reprovision that data. If that's the case, if you just misasked the question there. If you have provisioned the data as thick on your data store inside of vSphere and you want it to be thin in the future, because we don't support that storage volume storage vMotion for that volume to be moved. Another way to achieve that potentially is to maybe look at some sort of data protection software. So you could use Valero, which is the open source software, and I think Red Hat might use Valero under the hood for some of their stuff now. I might be wrong.
ADP, yeah.
Yeah, so you could use Valero to back up, protect that volume. If you want to use an enterprise solution, I played around and done some blogging around Kasten, for example, as well. But there's obviously lots of choice out there when you come to enterprise software. So again, you would just follow a normal kind of backup and restore point of view for that piece instead. And again, thinking about where that smarts is inside of Kubernetes. You want to kind of do it at that layer because you want Kubernetes to be aware that, hey, this data is moving. I need to reschedule a pod. I need to link it to a new volume that's now been reprovisioned in the thin mode on the vSphere level, but has my data in it.
And I think the migration toolkit for containers also uses Valero behind the scenes. And that would be it's still Valero based, so it still needs an S3 object store to temporarily store the data to, but it will do that in one step, if you will, instead of take a backup, do a restore. Let's see, looking through questions here.
So I was just checking. I got seen the one comment from Steve Cassidy saying it's a fantastic answer between the relationship between Red Hat and VMware. I had to check he wasn't a VMware employee saying that.
Does ODF support VMware data storage without creating local disks? Yes. In fact, I think the recommended way, I'm speaking for ODF folks here, I will admit I'm not an ODF expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I think the recommended way, if you're deployed on vSphere, is to use the CSI storage class and basically use the CSI storage class to provision the PVCs that ODF then uses to create its disks, or its I don't know what ODF calls them, the Ceph words, and I don't remember Ceph words. Yeah. Gosh, what are those things called? Whatever they call the data units or units of storage inside of Ceph that I can never remember.
Oh, OSDs.
OSD.
You're talking about yeah.
That was the
Bricks
word.
Bricks cluster. That was bad.
Bricks. Yeah, Bricks is clustered. Yeah, I couldn't remember OSD. Whatever OSD stands for.
So a question there about supportability with the vRealize suite. So yeah, that's if I can share my screen,
you're the expert on this, Dean.
Here's a slide I prepared earlier. So let me. Okay, there we go. So this should be a PowerPoint that you can see. Does that work?
It is. It's I think bandwidth is catching up, so it's a little blurry on the share there, but that's okay.
No problem. I won't move anything then. So okay, from a vRealize point of view, quick note out there: we have renamed that product suite to the ARIA suite going forward, but that's a different conversation for a different day. How do I configure where my containers are running, for example? So we're using vRealize operations. We can do an infrastructure up view into from your vSphere level into the container environment. We support OpenShift from that point of view, and it's with the Kubernetes management pack. So yes, the answer is from that point of view is there. If I click next, what can we do with logs? So we also support bringing Kubernetes logs, whether it's OpenShift or any other Kubernetes environment, into our log insight product. And actually, I co-wrote a blog with Red Hat last year on how to do that into our Log Insight Cloud product as well. So that's our SaaS-based offering. And I don't have a slide today on how to do this with our automation product. So that's how would you build things like OpenShift clusters. But I'll share a blog in the chat for Johnny to share out to everyone that talks about vRealize automation. So how can you build OpenShift clusters and consume OpenShift clusters using our automation product as well. So essentially, high level, everything with the vRealize suite has some sort of integration, communication channel ability with OpenShift.
Yeah, it reminds me of, and this is going back a ways. Do you remember a company called Akori? Akori was the first time I encountered a product where in the VMware in vSphere, I could click on a virtual machine and see all the way back through, like all the way down to which disks on the storage array its disks were using to help identify performance problems. Or I can see exactly which network adapter on which host the virtual machine is running on, its traffic is running through, and stuff like that, to be able to identify and troubleshoot problems with what's going on. So adding in, now there's another layer, Kubernetes, adding in all the Kubernetes information in there, like, oh, this pod is having issues. Well, it's going through these virtual network adapters across this SDN, like huge amounts of data that are in there, and any little bit. And vRealize has really come a long way in it's ARIA.
So it's now the ARIA suite. So the existing products that were under the vRealize brand are still there. We have some new capabilities and new tool that we brought out as part of the ARIA branding as well. So please hit me up on Twitter or LinkedIn if you're kind of interested in that going forward, or just check out the VMware Cloud Management blog posts as well. So there you go. Andrew's put my Twitter account up for everyone. I just shared a couple of links for Jonathan as well to pass out to everyone. So we've got the Red Hat blog that I did about logging. I've got a blog I did about monitoring using VROPS and through Prometheus itself. You can also use cAdvisor if you don't want to use Prometheus. We also have an observability tool. It's called ARIA Operations for Apps now, but it was previously under the name Towns Observability, or even older, Wavefront, when we purchased the company. Yeah. And that's an older blog post, the older name on, but again, the theory is still the same there. So that's from an app down point of view into your environment as well. So that's giving you different metrics and typically used by different personas, more SRE tech teams as well, and can look at things like spam logs inside your application and so forth as well. So I'm just having a quick look. So Khalid followed up his question about the integration with vRealize. Is there an operator for vRealize? So we don't have any operator from the vRealize suite into there, apart from for our observability tooling, which is to deploy the container inside the environment that pulls the data into our platform. From a vRealize operations point of view, we connect to either cAdvisor container or Prometheus. So Prometheus platforms are there. That would have to be one that you deploy yourself, because as you probably know, you don't have the ability to customize the Prometheus that's provided out of the box. And then for log insight, again, we're actually relying on FluentD to bring the logs into our platform as well. So you just deploy FluentD the way that you would for any other type of solution.
Speaking of logging, Johnny, I didn't know if you know this, but we were talking with the logging folks recently about the move to Loki. I didn't know that Loki only supported object storage right now, so that was news to me when I learned that.
Yeah, I don't recall that coming out. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. rhope9, I see your comment here about problem detector and how you encountered a upgrade getting stuck due to some work happening below or at the vSphere level. I'd be interested to know more about that. If you could send me an email, because I'm happy to share that over with the engineering folks and see if it's something that they can basically detect and maybe alert on. I would say usually the issue with that is permissions. We try and keep the permission set as small as possible for the VMware integration pieces. So it might be something that they can't retrieve with the permission set that we use, which is limited pretty much to machine provisioning and storage, CSI operations. But yeah, it's always worth asking and, letting them tell us no to see if we can get in more checks and, therefore have more success or better success with upgrades. I was having a conversation with someone last week around upgrades, because they were lamenting, it's been, why haven't upgrades made it to stable yet? My customers really need to test, upgrades. They need to validate all these things. And, my response was along the lines of, well, we want to make sure that it is going to be successful, right? The reason why they haven't released it yet is because we know that there's issues that are causing problems and we don't want to have it out there and all that other stuff. So the more of those things that we can find and identify and basically arm, for lack of a better term, you all, our admins, to make good decisions, the better. Dell Power Protect, Valero is behind.
Yeah, so Dell use Valero under the hood on top of Power Protect. So again, if you're having some problems protecting that data using the Dell Power Protect platform, get a ticket opened with them, have them look into it. It could be a configuration issue, it could be a software issue. But again, you pay for these support contracts, right? So, get the use out of them. Don't sit there struggling in the dark or struggling to find the answers on Google all the time as well.
Absolutely.
Make
Absolutely. Gabriel, is there a
That
way
was-
to use Datastore clusters? Sorry, Johnny, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that was the point that we were making last week too, Andrew, right? Like in our conversation around like productionifying your clusters or making sure that you're production ready is like know how to get a hold of support, right? Instead of you bashing your head against the wall for 3 days, 5 days, 1 day, whatever it is, know how to put that ticket in, know your number, whatever. It sounds like it's the same process for VMware, right? Like make sure you know who to contact and then just go ahead and submit the ticket. There's no pride lost when you submit a ticket to get some assistance, especially if you pay for it.
It makes me think of my wife whenever when my kids were littler and we'd go out for a date, and there's a babysitter, and she'd always have a big sheet of paper taped to the refrigerator that was like, here's here's Andrew's phone number, here's my phone number, here's here's who to contact if you can't get a hold of us, here's the neighbor's
Case
phone
of
number.
emergency.
Yeah, I remember years ago I wrote I was working with our global support team and one of our more dedicated members who was dedicated to a small set of customers, he wrote a template which was like he used to say to his customer, here's the template, whatever you need, log ticket, we'll fill this template in and make sure logs are available and I can support you quicker. And in the end, I took that and I changed it for my job role at the time for where I was using it in places. And then I ended up writing a blog to everyone saying like, hey, if you want to like have a better relationship with your vendors, especially when it's support tickets, like have a good template, make sure you tell them early. Like at VMware, we have something called a proactive support ticket as well. So if you have the right level of support with us, you can tell us beforehand if you're making any big changes, data center migrations, application upgrades. We'll help you validate your runbooks. We'll, if you're going to do that typically at a weekend as well, we'll make sure that our weekend team are aware of all of this. That, if stuff goes bang, you're going to be saying, hey, mission critical things are down. We're aware that might happen and we're ready to support you. If anything doesn't look right, when we validate your runbooks, we're going to point that out to you as well. And I assume there'll be a similar type of terminology usage inside of Red Hat as well, from a Red Hat support contract point of view too.
Yeah, I think when we're doing consulting. Oh, my bad. Go ahead. Finish your thought. I'm sorry.
No, I was just wrapping up. It's okay.
Yeah, I like in consulting, when we'd go on an engagement, we'd essentially start with that, right? We'd go and open up a ticket, like, hey, we're gonna have consultants on site, this kind of thing, and so that way, like, if something went off or went wrong, we could actually reach back and use that ticket as a reference, and it just helps speed up the whole process, So yeah, we pretty much have the same thing. And sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. It's a little bit of a delay.
I just posted a KCS that is titled. I guess I can show it, huh? So it's titled. Oops, I'm gonna quit turning off that enhanced OpenShift support case reference article. So it basically exactly what y'all were just describing is here if you want to try and self troubleshoot, here's some specific things that you can try and do. But in general, here's the fastest way or the best way to get all of the information that we need to get you help the fastest. Because, of course, you can go in and you can open a support case that says, I need help with XYZ. And usually the first thing that they're going to respond back with is, well, can you provide us this information? And, you're just adding time into that resolution cycle. So this is an attempt to short circuit that, if you will. Let's see.
So we need to go back to the question.
Yeah, I think we had a question about using Datastore clusters instead of
that was Gabriel. Is there a way to use? Oh, thank you, Johnny. Is there a way to use? We should use the tools that are at our disposal to actually organize this, right? Is there a way to use Datastore clusters instead of pointing to specific data stores? What about with ODF? Dean, you're probably more familiar with this than I am.
Yeah. Okay. So from a OpenShift installation point of view today, if you're using the IPI installation method, pointing at a Datastore cluster unfortunately is not supported. And that is because what happens is you go to like a load balance name and it passes it through to something completely different. And the checks that go on inside of the OpenShift install then get confused because the VMs are not where they're supposed to be. if you are creating things through the CSI driver, it's a very similar story. And the reason behind that is because inside of a Datastore cluster, you can migrate that data across what's inside that cluster, and then it comes into storage vMotion point of view today. So the answer is unfortunately not today, but keep an eye on that in the future because there are enhancements to be made there.
Yeah.
If you are using Datastore clusters inside of your environment, say inside of vSphere, you still have the ability to put things specifically on a Datastore within that Datastore cluster anyway, so you are not losing any functionality from that point of view. But I do understand that, maybe we're making things not as easy as possible for you from that features point of view.
If you do target a specific data store in a Datastore cluster, just make sure to turn off storage DRS.
Yes, that was the point I was going to get to at the end of it.
Okay.
We have this great feature called Storage DRS, which moves things back automatically for you if data stores are getting in full. And that's the reason why we don't support it. And a lot of people will point it directly at a data store, forget about that feature, and then, hey, why is nothing working? So predominantly we say to people it's a bad thing. Let's talk about your architecture, how we do that. That's the very quick answer on the reason why. Unfortunately, for ODF, I can't answer that because I'm not someone who uses the ODF platform or so forth. So I'm going to pass it back to Andrew or Gianni.
Yeah. So one quick note. So a while ago, I want to say 4.9, 4.10 timeframe, I tested to see what would happen if I used the tag selection feature of the CSI driver. Because in the CSI driver, in the storage class, you can basically say, select a data store from one of the ones that has this tag associated with it. And I had 4 or 5 different data stores associated with it. And what would happen is it would choose one of those data stores and then stick with it until that data store filled up. And then it would choose another one and would stick with it until that data store filled up. So it didn't have that DRS-like feature or functionality of choosing the data store based off of whatever mechanism DRS uses, storage DRS uses to choose a data store. Rather, it was just pick one at random and use it until you can't use it anymore. So with ODF, ODF, the same thing would apply as far as I know. Of you can't use a vSphere data store cluster to host ODF disks for all of the same reasons, right? It could potentially move those disks underneath ODF. Like any storage solution, ODF is going to be sensitive to the stun that happens at the end. I also wonder, depending on how busy it is, because it's been a minute, but Dean, please, again, tell me to eat crow if I need to. It's the length of the stun is determined by the busyness of the disks. So it's like the more busy the disk is, then the more it has to go through this process, right?
A full data path going through the hypervisor into the storage array, right? So the busier that storage array is to accept requests, acknowledge that I/O, then that obviously gets passed up. And 9 times out of 10, when even you have contentional storage, you don't really see it in your VMs too much. But when then you're doing something more of an intensive operation, where then you're going, hey, I'm going to cluster all of these LUNs together all of a sudden. Then you start to add a little bit more complexity on that, and there's the management layer on head. So that's where your overhead comes from. And typically, what we see is it starts off as like a small issue, like contention, for example, and then it gets to the point where everything falls over because nothing is being serviced whatsoever from a performance point of view. And that's the first time that you notice there being a problem. However, the problem, if you then start to look at like your monitoring tools, all of a sudden was, this figure was tracking up, for the past month or two going up. And again, I'll be honest with you, it typically the issues come out of bad management from that point of view, rather than, and not understanding fully how those features work, rather than the right planning architecture that goes on beyond that. The amount of customer sites used to turn up with where I'd audit them and they turned features on. Just going to turn that feature on because it's there and we'll see what it does, rather than understanding fully how to utilize all of that.
Storage I/O control,
storage I/O control, And we also now have network I/O control. Just to throw that in there too.
I used to work for a storage vendor, and it was I won't say amusing, but it was interesting when people would just, I wonder what this does, and turn on storage I/O control, and then all of a sudden, like all kinds of issues with their applications start happening. ODF. Remember, ODF is a concentrator of I/O. So you're going to have 3 or 6 or 12 or however many VMDKs providing capacity to ODF, but all of the pods, you might have 5,000 PVCs that are now all writing to that small number of VMDKs.
Yeah.
So trying to do something like a storage vMotion of that is going to be much more difficult for the platform, because it has to, just like with regular vMotion, memory-based vMotion, it has to copy all that data, or take a snapshot and copy all that data across, and then take a new snapshot and copy the delta data. And like, it repeats that process until it can get down to a small enough amount of changed data that it can do the stun fast enough. And if there's just huge amounts of data that are changing, it's either going to result in the storage vMotion failing, or it taking longer than expected. And of course, ODF itself, or the applications, are going to be sensitive to, hey, why did my storage just stun for half a second or a second? That makes me angry, and then you end up with bigger issues. Yeah.
So the just to summarize on this, for those people sat there thinking, oh, what is this data clustering feature in vSphere? So essentially, there's 3 modes, and the reason why you bring that all together. So we have the space utilization load balancing, which Andrew already talked about. The Datastore starts to get full. It will storage vMotion virtual machines about to balance that storage utilization across multiple data stores. We've got the same with I/O balancing. So the more contended a particular loan comes, it's going to storage vMotion that VM. So again, anything attached to that VM gets moved, and that has a penalty to it. The last one, which I think is a little bit probably more of an interesting situation to talk about, is anti-affinity rules. Make sure virtual machines are on different data stores to one another. So actually, again, although we're saying don't use storage clusters, if that was the reason why you were doing it, was for that anti-affinity around virtual machines and where they're based, you can achieve that through the machine pools inside of OpenShift, because you can just create 2 machine pools for your your compute plane nodes, for example, your workers, and say, this set goes on these data stores, this set goes on these data stores, and straight away you know that they're not going to clash with one another. So again, there's other ways to benefit from those types of requirements as well.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, because we just added control plane machine sets, but I think it's only 1 machine set for all of the control plane nodes, so you wouldn't be able to do that there. Mira, my apologies for butchering names. How is OpenShift on IBM Z or mainframe? Same level with x86 or better? Johnny, I don't know what that was. That my KCS article that I linked 121? Yeah, it was. Okay. So there is a KCS article. I'll see if I can dig it up, that gives you a list of all of the different features, capabilities, all of the things that are compatible across all of the different architectures. At a minimum, if you go to the subscription guide, but I could go to the subscription guide from there. Type help. So if we go to the subscription guide here, the subscription guide, come on, has a list. Sorry, I'm scrolling really fast here, and my browser is not happy. So it has a list of like OpenShift Platform Plus components as they pertain to the different architectures. So you can see here, like ACS doesn't work on System Z. And these 2 columns, there's installs on and manages to. So for example, down here, I can't install Quay to System Z, but it can store System Z based images, as well as, of course, a System Z system can retrieve images from that. But there is a KCS. There's a detailed KCS that has those things. I just need to find it, and I'll dig that up here in just a moment. Let's see. Hopefully that answered your question, and I'll get that article for you, Mira. If you would like, you can also reach out to me, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com, and I'll send you that article too. Issues with etcd and clusters when somebody accidentally picked our OpenShift data store for busy applications VM server. Yes, noisy neighbors they happen. Actually, that's one of the really good and useful things for both storage IO control, SIOC, as well as shares. That's an interesting, actually, can I touch on that for a moment with you, Dean? I don't remember if it was you or if it was Robbie that I was having a conversation with, of like for a while now in the OpenShift docs, we've had this recommendation of setting latency sensitivity to high for virtual machines. And I think that doesn't behave or doesn't do what we think it does. It tells, my understanding is that it tells the hypervisor essentially that this virtual machine has like super low latency application level requirements. So things like VoIP applications, where it needs to have priority access to CPU resources, not just reserve the resources, but like it needs priority access. So for a while, I've been making recommendations to folks to use things like shares, resource pools with reservations and storage IO control, network IO control, right? All of the traditional things for getting that. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so the latency setting is basically on or off. I'll share that with Johnny in a second. Shout out to everyone. It basically is just affects how those virtual machines are scheduled. So where are they scheduled on which cores of the CPU on the physical hardware? But in terms of their contention and access to resources, it doesn't really affect them too much. So that's where you'd be using things like the resource pools. And again, when we start to talk about resource pools and limits, that's another area where we always see misconfigurations and tickets going into our support desk for people to say, hey, these things aren't working. So a limit is a maximum amount of resources you're going to give that virtual machine. That's it. So if you have 16 CPUs to a virtual machine, but you give it a limit of 100 megahertz, it's not getting any more than 100 megahertz, right? That's it. It's been cut off, no matter how much that operating system inside that virtual machine asks for. We always see problems with that. People always put limits in to try and fix some sort of problem, especially noisy neighbor problems. Forget about them, and then it becomes a major issue. It does also can be hierarchical. So if you have resource pools under resource pools, you can then set a resource pool limit, and you can also set a virtual machine individual limit as well. The other side of this is about guaranteeing access to resources. So a resource pool, you can give it something called a share. So this is a ratio against everything else in the environment. And there is a view that you can see what the allocated shares are to each virtual machine inside the environment. And essentially on that ratio, you're trying to say, give 2 times or 3 times as much access to CPU for this virtual machine versus these other virtual machines as well, or this pool of virtual machines onto the resource pool. And it does take quite a bit of planning to get that right. And VMware is giving you a way when you configure these to have like a low, medium, or high setting inside the resource pools as well. That makes it a bit easier, but you can also manually set those figures yourself as well. So again, before you start to configure these types of settings, maybe go back and ask yourself, what are the reasons you're doing this? Is just because you've got one virtual machine that's having a resource problem? Maybe dive in and understand fully what that resource problem is and what else would be affected in the platform before you start to set something which changes the ratio of how things are scheduled and what resource they have access to as well.
I have a bit of a random question. I remember from years ago that putting IOPS limits on disks had a bit of an unintended consequences. And I remember this because I tried this when I was an admin, and we put like it's like 100 IOPS limit on the operating system disk, and then 1,000 IOPS limit on the data disk. And what we discovered is that it adds those two together and then applies it across both of those.
Yes.
So you could have the operating system disk could consume up to 1,100 IOPS. The data disk could consume up to 1,100 IOPS, but together they couldn't exceed that limit. So just be careful.
Yeah. And again, because obviously what you've got to remember there is like this setting goes in at a virtual machine level, and that virtual machine then has access to multiple disks. And it might have access to a disk that's shared between virtual machines as well, right? So you might take a VMDK file and link it to 2 virtual machines, which is typically a bad idea, but you can do that. And there's about a rationalization of how that works as well. There's a couple of older books. They've not been updated for vSphere 7 or 8, as far as I'm aware, but they were wrote by Frank Denneman, Duncan Epping, and Niels Haggart. So that's the clustering deep dive books. They are fantastic resources. They're available free as PDFs now if you go off and Google them. Although they are for older vSphere versions, the underlying fundamentals that they talk about and how things like schedulers work and limits work and so forth, all of that is still the same in the newer versions of vSpheres. And oh my God, Andrew's got an older copy there of one of them
Yeah,
about
dude.
how HHRS work.
Yeah, that was for vSphere 4.1. It's
Yeah.
Frank and Duncan. So yeah, that was a
Show
blast
off.
from the past. Thanks, Dean.
So yeah, I'm just trying to. Yeah, so I recommend you to Google it, because you can still buy physical copies of the books as well. There's a couple of issues where like the books were given away as free as ebooks through some other vendors where you just give them their email address. So I won't share those links, but you can Google them yourselves. But it's the clustering deep dive books. And again, there's a lot of content out there on the VMware websites. We've done a lot around performance management and so forth. And again, if you're struggling to find the right information, drop one of us a message. And if we don't know, we'll message between ourselves and get you the right links as well for all that information.
Yeah, our Hope 9 makes a good point here. Performance management is always hard. And I always, it's important to have a baseline, to have the monitoring and the tools in place to understand what performance looks like now, so that when you make a change, you can see whether or not that change was positive or negative. And you can see that empirically, like you have the data to prove that yes or no, it was good.
I think this goes back to the earlier questions about, does the vRealize suite support OpenShift? And for me, when I saw what we created with the management packs that we can connect into Kubernetes environment, I was like, this is like one of the missing keys of information, because I speak and work quite a lot in the financial customers, so large banks, for example, and I'd say to them, like, how often does your container team ring up and say, hi, it's running terribly, it's definitely a virtualization platform? And they say, okay, what's running terribly? And they go, oh, this pod named XYZ, blah, 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 API server. And they're going, okay, where is that? And they go, well, it's on these virtual machines. And you're like, but where? And there was no kind of governance to be able to say, oh, there's this pod, this container runs on this pod, runs in this replica set, is part of this, these set compute plane nodes that runs on this cluster in particular. And with the vRealize operations, we can give you that relationship right the way from this is the host, this is the virtual machine, this is the Kubernetes environment, this is the Kubernetes node that it's on, this is the pod. And all of a sudden that becomes all searchable, and you can chart out all of those metrics to find out exactly what's going on. Because again, let's look at the CPU request being made by the pod. Let's look at the CPU request being made by the node it's on. Is it a node problem at a Kubernetes layer? Is it the virtual machines contending because someone's put a limit in place at a vSphere level? Is it being affected by a noisy neighbor of that host is suffering contention, so all virtual machines are having a bad experience? Do we have to go back down to the I/O path of the storage level? Because actually, it's not a CPU problem. It's just the CPU looks busy because it's not getting its request back from the storage quick enough. So it's just sat there waiting all the time, going, give me more, give me more, give me more. So again, using tooling like that and understanding it is immensely powerful. And figuring out what the operating model will be of how you share that data between your teams as well. Because I'm sure there's many people on this call today who are platform operators, SREs, who care about the platform. You build the platform, you operate the platform, but you hand everything else off, the access to it and to what you put on the platform, those workloads are managed by a completely different team. And those workload teams, those application teams probably have their own tooling to monitor the applications, right? And somewhere you've got to rationalize all of that data.
Yeah, I responded to a Reddit thread the other day about CPU overcommit at at both the hypervisor as well as at the Kubernetes level, and it's one of those, like, one, it was a two-part question. One was, how much overcommit should I set? Well, I don't know. How much monitoring do you have in place? How much impact is there to the business when contention happens? If contention happens, is this a critical application that is the core or maybe the only way that your company makes money? In which case, contention resulting in bad performance means literally lost money. It's a very, one, intensely personal question for each one of the companies, but two, to your point, you got to have the monitoring. Anytime you're changing things, you need to be able to verify and validate whether it's been a positive or a negative change and all that. But yeah, overcommitment, it's immensely useful, but sometimes dangerous.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah, exactly.
It's always great to see
the web.
good cliche in technology.
You're making that point earlier about like, yeah, you could do this, but that's what I always go back to my friend Claude. It's like, oh, you could do it that way. Like it's like the could you versus should you, like yeah, you could do it that way, but should you do it that way? Like that's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, rhope9, I see your comment there about VPA. I just before we came on the stream, I responded to somebody on a question about the vertical pod autoscaler. It was actually as a result of the stream that we did about it. And I seem to recall that the look back period for VPA is relatively short. So it's one of those, if you have a workload that is, like 1 day a week, it's really CPU intensive, and the other 6 days it's not, or 1 hour a day it is, and the other 23 it's not. I don't know how all of that evens out or balances out with VPA, because I don't know how far back it looks into the workload metrics. Run it in off mode, or recommendation mode. So, all right. I know it's coming up on 80 minutes, or I guess we've been going for 80 minutes here. Dean, I know you are over in the UK, so I want to be sensitive to evening time for you, family time for you. I don't want to take too much time into your evening. So, for our audience, please, any other questions that you have, feel free to submit those in chats. While we're wrapping up here, we'll do our best to answer any of those questions. If you don't get to those questions, if you're listening later, or if you, after the stream ends, if you think of something, you can, of course, reach out to us. I'm more than happy to respond to those. You can reach me at andrew.sullivan@redhat.com or Practical Andrew on Twitter and Reddit and Slack and all of the other places. And of course, I'll throw Johnny under the bus, as always, johnny@redhat.com or jrocktx1. We love to get questions, comments. rhope9, I know you share various things with us, and it's really appreciated, even if we can't always respond to things as quickly as we would like. My inbox is an absolute train wreck. I've been sitting here watching my inbox tick up, by the way, as we've been going through this. Today's one of the bad days. I went from having 2 emails, it's now at 27. So I don't know what's going on, but that's frightening.
That was one email.
Is that what the shoulders? Oh, sorry, dude. We're doing this all day.
One email the question, and then 26 saying, "Are you there? Are you ready? Can you respond, Andrew?"
Or for any Red Hatters who are listening, the infamous, unsubscribe threads, reply all, unsubscribe. That goes on for hundreds of messages. Yeah.
So at VMware, there's a thing, and it predominantly happens in the US, but when those reply all storms happen, it's become a thing where in the chain, someone will reply with a brownie recipe. And that is the kind of signal, the fact that you need to walk away from your computer, go and do something else. Like, people need to stop replying. And I don't know where it came from, like what the origins of it, but when someone first told me about it, when I first moved to VMware, I was like, that is amazing. That is the best response to reply all from ever.
Yeah, that's like the hard like hard interrupts, like no stop. I'm trying to think. My wife and I recently watched on Apple TV the Shrinking. And one of the ladies, she like boops her husband, like a literal just boop, like to interrupt his thing at the. It was hilarious.
Is that a new thing in the Sullivan household now?
No, I've done that for years to the dogs, right? You boop the nose, on boop the snoot on the dog. So right now our dog, I had to eject her from the office because she's wearing a cone right now because she got a scrape or something at the groomer, and now she won't leave it alone because dogs are dogs. And I don't call it the cone of shame. I call it the cone of no self-control. But which is a little unfair, right? Because she's a dog. She doesn't know what self-control is. But anyways, I'm rambling now. So yes, thank you everyone. Really appreciate you joining us today. For our audience, thank you for all of the amazing questions. Thank you for all of the feedback. Don't hesitate to reach out to us at any point in time. We have multiple ways of getting in touch with Dean as well as you do. Dean is available on Twitter, on I'm sorry, I'm trying to talk and search for the right thing to click here. Twitter, as
on LinkedIn.
Yeah, LinkedIn, Kubernetes, Slack, all of the places.
Yeah, and if any of you are attending KubeCon in Europe as well this month, it's in like 2.5 weeks. Yeah. So I'll also be there as an attendee myself, soaking it all up as well. So if you see me, give me a wave and say, hey.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you very much, Dean. We really appreciate you joining. As always, this has been phenomenally informative. I always learn something whenever you come on. I feel like I'm plugged into what's going on with OpenShift on VMware, and I still always learn things from you. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And yeah, with that, I will hand over to Johnny for any last words.
Yeah, thank you, Dean. This is awesome. Like we've had a pretty good month so far, but like these are like I think VMware and what's the other one? Service mesh and secrets and stuff like that. I think that these are like huge topics that we get. I get a ton of value out of just because like I love listening to to all the different conversations and understanding things. So thanks for coming on and really appreciate it. And hopefully we don't have to wait a year for you to come back. So it'd be good to have you back when we do something new and have you come back on. So thank you again for coming on. And Andrew, as always, my man, you're awesome.
Thanks, y'all. Have a good week.
Bye, everyone.